Here's something nobody is talking about. Right now, at this exact moment, there are 47 million people living their completely normal lives, going to work, picking up groceries, scrolling their phones, who have no idea that a 72-hour window separates them from a situation they are completely unprepared for. Not 72 days, not 72 weeks, 72 hours. And the most unsettling part, the system they are depending on to warn them, to protect them, to tell them when to act is the same system that disappears first. I've been studying infrastructure vulnerability and crisis preparedness for a long time. I've read the government reports, I've gone through the emergency management documents, I've talked to people who have lived through regional grid failures, supply chain disruptions, extended infrastructure collapses, and there is one thing that every single one of those experiences has in common. Nobody saw the 72-hour window closing until they were already inside it. And most of them were people just like you, smart, prepared in other ways. They just didn't see this one coming. Stay with me, because what I'm about to walk you through is not a worst-case fantasy. It is a scenario built entirely from documented reality, from grid failure data, from supply chain research, from emergency management studies that are publicly available but almost nobody reads. And by the end of this, I want you to have something that 47 million people currently don't have, a real picture of what 72 hours actually looks like. Let me start with a number that stopped me cold the first time I saw it: 3 days. That is the average amount of consumable inventory that a typical American supermarket carries at any given moment. Not 3 weeks, not 3 months, 3 days, 72 hours of food sitting on those shelves for the surrounding community, assuming normal purchasing patterns and a functioning supply chain feeding new product in every single day. The moment that supply chain pauses, the moment the trucks stop, the moment the distribution centers go offline, the moment the system that invisibly restocks those shelves every night hits any kind of significant disruption, those 3 days start counting down. And they count down fast, because the first thing people do when they sense something is wrong is go to the store. Think about the last time there was a major storm warning in your area. Remember what the bread aisle looked like 24 hours before landfall. That's normal human behavior under mild, localized, temporary stress. Now scale that response to a situation that is not localized, not temporary, and affecting not one city but a region. Picture the grocery store 12 hours in, fluorescent lights humming overhead, the squeak of cartwheels on linoleum moving faster than normal, voices tight, the smell of anxiety mixing with refrigerated air. Sarah walks through the entrance, not panicking, just wanting a few extra supplies. The parking lot is full, the bread aisle is stripped bare, the checkout line stretches to the back of the store. She realizes, I'm already too late. The shelves don't last 72 hours in that scenario. They last closer to 18. Food is actually not your most critical 72-hour vulnerability. I know that sounds counterintuitive. Hear me out. The average healthy adult can function for days without food. Uncomfortable, yes. Dangerous, not immediately. But there are 3 systems that most people in modern cities depend on entirely. Systems they have never once thought about because those systems have never failed them, that begin breaking down inside that 72-hour window in ways that fundamentally change your situation. Water, medical infrastructure, fuel, and all 3 of them share a single critical dependency that most people have never considered: electricity. What I'm about to tell you might change how you think about your tap water forever. Your tap water right now. It's not magic. It's electrically powered pumps, maintaining pressure across the distribution network. Grid fails, pumps switch to backup generators. Those generators run on fuel. Most municipal systems carry 24 to 72 hours of fuel on site. After that, without resupply, pressure starts dropping. No pressure means no tap water. No tap water means no drinking water from your faucet, no flushing toilets, no functioning fire suppression systems, no ability to run the basic sanitation infrastructure that prevents secondary health crises. Picture this: you turn the faucet at hour 48. Nothing. You turn it again, a sputter, air hissing through the pipes, then silence. That hollow, empty sound of a system with no pressure, no water coming, just the metallic echo of infrastructure that stopped working. And here is the detail that most people miss entirely. The fuel needed to resupply those generators sits in trucks that run on the same fuel infrastructure that is also failing. This is the part where the system starts eating itself. I want you to stop for a second and ask yourself an honest question. How much water do you have in your home right now? Not the pipes, not the tap. Stored, accessible, ready-to-use water that requires no infrastructure to reach. Most people, when they actually think about it, realize the answer is somewhere between very little and none. And I'm not saying that to make you feel unprepared. I'm saying it because that gap between where most people are right now and where they need to be is exactly the gap that 72 hours exposes, slowly at first, then all at once. This is why 47 million people are vulnerable to a window they don't even know exists. Not because they are careless, not because they are unintelligent, but because the modern system is so seamless, so invisible, so reliably present that the idea of it pausing, even briefly, never makes it onto the list of things worth thinking about. Until the 72-hour window opens, and by then, thinking about it is no longer enough. We're just getting started. Because the first 6 hours of that window, what happens in them, and what most people do versus what they should do, that's where everything is decided, and that's exactly where we're going next. Chapter 2, the first 6 hours. Hour 0 looks exactly like a normal day. That's the part nobody tells you. There is no dramatic moment, no siren, no announcement that cuts through your morning routine and tells you that the next 72 hours are going to be different from every other 72 hours you've lived through. The window opens quietly, and by the time most people realize it has opened, they have already lost the hours that matter most. I want to walk you through what Hour 0 actually looks like, not in a movie, not in a government simulation, but in the real documented pattern that emerges every single time a significant infrastructure disruption has hit a major population center. Someone notices their phone isn't connecting properly. A few people mention the lights flickered. The gas station down the street has a line at 7 a.m., engines idling, the smell of exhaust mixing with morning coffee from the convenience store. People checking their phones, scrolling, waiting. Nobody's panicking. Nobody realizes the clock just started. These are not alarm bells. These are the kinds of things that people notice, shrug at, and move past. Because individually, none of them mean anything. Collectively, they are the first visible edge of the 72-hour window. And while those first quiet signals are appearing, the clock is already running. Here's what the first 6 hours actually determine. I've studied enough real-world infrastructure disruption events to know that the first 6 hours sort people into two groups, not by luck, not by wealth, by one thing, whether they have a plan that doesn't depend on the system they are currently watching fail. Group 1, the overwhelming majority spends the first 6 hours waiting for information, for clarity, for someone in authority to tell them what to do and how serious this is. This is completely natural human behavior. We are wired to seek social confirmation before taking action, especially in ambiguous situations. The problem is that in a genuine 72-hour scenario, the first 6 hours are your highest value hours. The stores still have product. The roads are still clear. Your options are still open. Waiting through those 6 hours doesn't feel like a mistake. It feels like patience. It feels like not overreacting. Mike is Group 1. He saw the signs at Hour 2. Phone acting weird. Neighbors talking about power flickers. He thought, I'll check the news after lunch. By Hour 14, he walks into the grocery store. Empty shelves echo. The fluorescent hum seems louder without the usual crowd noise. The checkout scanner beeps uselessly. Nothing left to scan. Mike's still waiting for official word. Hour 14. That's when patience turns into regret. Group 2, the smaller group, the prepared group, uses those first 6 hours differently. Not with panic. Panic is never the answer, and I want to be clear about that because there is a version of preparedness that looks like fear, and I want no part of it. What Group 2 does in those first 6 hours is methodical, calm. Already decided. Lisa is Group 2, same signs at Hour 2. She doesn't wait, fills water jugs, checks medications, tops off the gas tank. By Hour 14, she's home, supplies ready, watching everyone else scramble. They know their water situation, they know their food situation, they know where their critical medications are, how many days of supply they have, and whether that number is inside or outside the 72-hour window. They are not scrambling, they are executing a plan they made before the window opened. That distinction, plan made before versus decisions made during, is the entire game. Now let's talk about what the system looks like from Hour 6 to Hour 24, because this is where the invisible infrastructure starts becoming visible in ways that genuinely surprise people who have never thought about it. Hospital generators? Designed for 72 to 96 hours of fuel. Sounds good until you realize those calculations assume the fuel supply chain still works. Roads passable, trucks moving, drivers available. Every assumption depends on the same grid that's already down. This is what emergency planners call a cascade failure, not one system breaking and pulling the systems connected to it, which pull the systems connected to them. The cascade is not dramatic, it is methodical. It follows the dependency map of modern infrastructure, like water following gravity, finding every connected low point and filling it. Water follows gravity, so does system failure. By hour 24, in a significant regional disruption, the cascade has typically reached the fuel supply chain, the water pressure network, and the communication infrastructure in that order. None of these failures announce themselves loudly. They taper. Pressure drops gradually, signal strength degrades, lines at fuel stations grow longer, and then stop moving entirely as stations run dry or lose the power to operate their pumps. And through all of it, the majority of people are still waiting for the announcement that tells them how serious this is. Here's the survival truth that hour 24 reveals. The announcement rarely comes in the form people expect. Official communication during infrastructure cascade events is almost always behind the reality on the ground, not because of malice, because the people responsible for making those announcements are working with information that is itself dependent on the infrastructure that is failing. By the time the official word reaches you, your best options are already gone. This means that by the time an official communication reaches you confirming that yes, this is serious, yes, you should take action, you are already at hour 24 or beyond. You are already inside the window, and the options that existed at hour 2 are largely gone. I've seen this pattern documented in grid failure postmortems, in supply chain disruption analyses, in emergency management after action reports. The gap between ground truth and official communication is not a bug in the system. It is a structural feature of how large complex systems process and communicate failure. Understanding this one thing changes how you think about the first 6 hours entirely. You cannot wait for confirmation to act. By the time confirmation arrives, action is significantly harder than it was when the first quiet signals appeared. The people who come through these windows intact are the people who learn to read those early signals, not with panic, but with calm, practiced recognition, and who moved while movement was still easy. There is a practical thing I want you to do right now, not after this video. Right now, while this is in your mind, think about the people in your life who depend on systems they have never questioned. The family member who takes daily medication and has maybe 4 days of supply at home. The neighbor who has never stored a single gallon of water beyond what's in the pipes. The people you care about who are through no fault of their own entirely inside the 72-hour vulnerability window without knowing it exists. You now know something they don't. That knowledge has value, but only if it travels. Only if it moves from you to them before the window opens, not during. That's not fear talking. That's the single most consistent lesson from every infrastructure disruption event I've ever studied. The people who came through intact almost always had someone in their life who told them in advance what to pay attention to. Be that person. Chapter 3, Hour 24 to 48. Hour 24 is where the story changes, not loudly, not with a single dramatic moment that everyone recognizes at the same time. It changes the way a tide changes, gradually, then all at once, and by the time most people notice the water is at their feet, the direction has already reversed. I want to be specific about what happens to human behavior at the 24-hour mark, because this is the part that emergency management literature documents carefully, that survivor accounts describe consistently, and that almost nobody talks about in practical preparedness conversations. We spend a lot of time discussing infrastructure. We spend almost no time discussing what happens to the people living inside that infrastructure when it goes quiet. And what happens is both completely understandable and genuinely challenging. The first thing that shifts is information behavior. First 6 hours, people consume information, checking phones, refreshing news feeds, listening for official updates. Hour 24, they produce it. Rumors, interpretations, worst-case narratives built from incomplete data, spreading at the speed of word of mouth through a community increasingly disconnected from verified sources. Rumors travel faster than truth, and in hour 24, that difference creates serious problems. I've read the after-action reports from major regional disruptions. The pattern is remarkably consistent. By the end of the first full day, the information environment has fragmented into competing narratives, most of them more frightening than the actual situation, none of them fully accurate, all of them spreading faster than any official communication can travel. This matters for your survival planning in a way that is deeply practical. In a degraded information environment, your decision-making quality is directly proportional to how much you decided in advance. Every decision you have to make in real time, under stress, with bad information and social pressure pulling in multiple directions, every one of those decisions cost you something: mental energy, time, clarity. The people who navigate hour 24 well are almost always the people who pre-decided the most, who walked through the scenario in their heads before it was real, and asked themselves, what would I do if this happened? What would I prioritize? Where would I go? Who would I check on? Pre-decided beats real time every single time. That is not an opinion. That is the documented conclusion of crisis decision-making research going back decades. Now let's talk about what the supply chain looks like at hour 36, because this is the number that most people find genuinely surprising when they first encounter it. Hour 36, the last mile problem. Fuel exists, reserves, tankers, distribution facilities full of product, but the connection between that supply and you? Broken. The fuel exists, you just can't reach it. That's the cruelest part. Gas stations that still have fuel in their underground tanks cannot pump it without power. Stations with generator backup saw lines form within the first 12 hours and ran dry well before hour 36. Hour 36. The gas station queue stretches a quarter mile, engines running, burning the fuel people are waiting to get. The air tastes like exhaust and tension. People sitting in hot cars, windows down, frustration rising with the temperature. Nobody's moving. The pumps that still work are surrounded. The ones that don't just sit there, useless. I want you to think about what you actually need fuel for in this scenario. Not comfort, not convenience. The critical fuel dependencies are evacuation if necessary, generator power if you have one, and the vehicles of emergency and medical personnel trying to maintain systems that keep the most vulnerable people functioning. The people who come through extended disruption events with the least difficulty, they moved the least in the early hours, stayed in place, conserved resources, let the chaos exhaust itself before making any significant moves. Stillness in the first 36 hours is a survival strategy. It feels wrong. Every instinct says move, act, do something. Stillness feels like weakness. It's actually survival. But the data says stay, conserve, and let your pre-made plan work so you don't have to make new decisions in a degraded environment. Hour 48 is the psychological pivot point. This is the moment that separates the disruptions that communities recover from relatively intact from the ones that leave lasting impact. Not because of what the infrastructure is doing at hour 48, by then the physical situation is what it is, but because of what is happening inside people. 2 days. That's how long most people can run on adrenaline before they hit their limit. 48 hours is roughly the ceiling of what most people can sustain on adrenaline in short-term coping. After 2 full days of stress, disrupted sleep, uncertainty, and the specific exhaustion that comes from making too many decisions with too little information, people hit a wall. Hour 48. You haven't slept properly in 2 days. Your hands shake when you try to open a water bottle. Your head pounds. Every decision feels like lifting a weight you don't have the strength for anymore. That's not weakness, that's biology. The people who hit that wall with some physical reserves intact, who have water, who have eaten something, who got at least some rest, find the wall manageable. Hard, but manageable. They can push through it with something left in reserve. Tom hits the wall at hour 48. He spent the first 2 days driving gas station to gas station, store to store, no water stored, no plan. Now he's exhausted, dehydrated, and the supplies he was chasing are gone. He's got nothing left. Not physically, not mentally. His preparation or lack of it determined everything that happened after hour 0. Your preparation is not just for you. It never was. Communities under stress are not isolated units. They are interconnected systems, just like the infrastructure they depend on. Here is what I want you to actually do with this. Not a 40-item checklist. Not expensive equipment. 3 things, honest, practical, achievable this week. 1. Water. 1 gallon per person per day for a minimum of 3 days. That is the starting point. Store it somewhere accessible. Check it every 6 months. That single action moves you out of the most critical vulnerability window for the most immediately life-affecting resource you depend on. 2. Medication audit. If you or anyone in your household takes daily medication, know exactly how many days of supply you have on hand right now. If that number is under 7, make closing that gap a priority this week. 7 days puts you outside the 72-hour window with meaningful buffer. 3. The conversation. Identify 1 person in your life, 1 family member, 1 neighbor, 1 friend who is completely inside this vulnerability window without knowing it exists. Have the conversation with them, not with alarm, with calm, practical framing. Give them the 72-hour picture. Let them decide what to do with it. That 3rd one matters more than most people expect, because preparedness that stays with 1 person has limited reach. Preparedness that travels through a community creates the kind of distributed resilience that actually changes outcomes. Chapter 4. Why Nobody Knows. Let me tell you why most people still don't know. It's the question embedded in this video's title, and I think it deserves a real answer. Not a conspiratorial one, not an angry one, an honest one. The system is not designed to tell you about its own vulnerabilities, not because of malice, not because someone in a room somewhere decided that 47 million people should remain unaware of a 72-hour window that could upend their lives, but because large complex systems are structurally oriented toward projecting confidence, toward maintaining the perception of reliability that keeps people calm, keeps commerce flowing, keeps the ordinary machinery of daily life moving without friction. Telling people that the supermarket has 72 hours of inventory is not a message that serves that function. Telling people that municipal water pressure depends on a fuel supply chain that has its own vulnerabilities, that doesn't project confidence, so it doesn't get told. Not in the safety briefings that don't exist. Not in the school curriculum that never covered it. Not in the public service announcements that focus on seatbelts and smoke detectors. The information is available. It lives in infrastructure reports, in emergency management literature, in grid failure postmortems. It is public, it is documented, it is simply never assembled into a picture that ordinary people can see clearly and act on. That is what this channel exists to do, and that is why you are here. Here is what I know about the people watching this. You didn't click on this video because you enjoy being frightened. You clicked because something in you recognizes that the gap between what you know and what you should know is worth closing. That recognition, that instinct toward genuine preparedness over comfortable assumptions is not common. It is, in my experience, the single most reliable predictor of who comes through hard situations intact. Not strength, not resources, not luck. The willingness to look at uncomfortable information before the moment of crisis arrives. You have done that today. That matters more than you might think. The 72-hour window is not a sentence, it is a measurement. It measures the distance between where most people are right now and where they need to be. And unlike geography, unlike infrastructure, unlike the cascade failures that follow a system going down, that distance is entirely within your control to close. The window is real. The question is, will you be ready when it opens? Water stored, medications audited, one honest conversation with someone you care about. Those 3 actions taken this week move you from inside the vulnerability window to outside it. Not perfectly, not with guarantees, but meaningfully, measurably, in ways that matter when the window opens. Picture your closet tomorrow night. Water jugs lined up, labels dated, medications counted and organized. You close the door knowing you're ready. That feeling? That's not paranoia. That's preparation turning into peace of mind. That's the difference between Group 1 and Group 2. I've been doing this long enough to know that most people who watch a video like this feel the weight of it for a day or two and then let it settle back into the background noise of everything else competing for their attention. I understand that. Life is loud, urgency fades, so I want to ask you one thing before you move on. Not to share this video, not to subscribe, just this. Before you go to sleep tonight, answer one question for yourself. If the 72-hour window opened tomorrow morning, if the quiet signals appeared at breakfast, if the system started its slow cascade before lunch, would you be in Group 1 or Group 2? If the answer is Group 1, you now know exactly what to do about it, and you know it costs less than a tank of gas and an afternoon to fix. 1 afternoon, 3 actions, that's all it takes. But here's the second thing I want you to consider. If you know someone who needs to hear this, someone living in one of those 47 million lives we talked about, someone who's completely inside this vulnerability window without knowing it exists, send them this video. Not to scare them, not to alarm them, because knowledge shared before the window opens is the closest thing to a survival guarantee any of us actually has. Preparedness that stays with one person has limited reach. Preparedness that travels through a community, through families, through neighborhoods. That's what creates real resilience when systems fail. You watched this entire video. You sat with uncomfortable information instead of scrolling past it. That decision, that small act of choosing to know rather than to assume, is exactly the instinct that keeps people functioning when everything around them stops working. That's the whole point. That has always been the whole point. Stay prepared, stay sharp, and remember, the 72-hour window doesn't announce itself, but you can be ready for it anyway. I'll see you in the next one.